Hello, and welcome to Toastmasters Live, where the Toastmasters are both the stars of the show as well as the production crew. Tonight, we have an exciting meeting planned for us, and I will guide us along the journey. My name is Tyler Hardy, and I am the Toastmasters for the evening. As Toastmaster, it's my duty to facilitate the overall flow of the agenda and ensure that we begin and end on time. Also, as Toastmaster, I get the pleasure to choose the theme of the night, which for this night, I chose Preparing for Spring. Now, here in Minnesota, we've waited many months for that first sign of spring, the chirping of birds, the thawing of ice and snow, and that quickened pace of our colleagues as we see them itching with spring fever. And spring is marked by several rituals, such as spring cleaning and what just happened last Sunday, daylight saving time. Daylight saving time actually originated in 1918 as a wartime measure during World War I. Congress passed this act as a way to gain another hour of useful daylight so that effectively workers could leave the factory 1 hour early with 1 more hour of sunlight to tend to their gardens, to complete household tasks, or just to have some type of recreation, ensuring that we had a healthy and productive workforce. After 1918, the nation did away with daylight saving time, but Theodore Roosevelt brought it back during World War II as wartime. And finally, in 1966, daylight saving time was passed into federal law, and we practice it to this day. The only two states that don't follow daylight saving times are Hawaii and Arizona. I guess they already have enough daylight. They don't need an extra hour in the clock. But I digress. Tonight is all about preparing for spring. We have one speaker to hear from, and we'll also hear from a couple respondents in our table topics or impromptu session. So without further ado, I will take this time to introduce our first speaker, he's a distinguished Toastmaster, Kent Hawks, and tonight he will take us on a journey. Much like, for example, Star Trek took us to places on TV where audience had never before gone. When we tell our own stories and share our own stories, we start by opening the door to our own memories and past, taking our audiences to where no one else had gone before. Our first speaker today is an experienced storyteller who takes every opportunity to encourage audiences to share their own stories. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Kent Hawks as he takes us to where no one has gone before.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Off we went into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. I was sitting in the back seat of a TA-4 training jet, the same first jet that every Top Gun pilot of the U.S. Navy flies in. The same jets, the same commander of the wing of training the Top Gun pilots. I was sitting in the back seat. I had the stick in my hand, controlling slight yaw to the right, side to the left, and the commander took over the stick, and we soared up into an Immelman and turned around without actually turning. It was a 3G Immelman pinning me to the seat, holding me down. I couldn't move or twitch a single muscle in my body. And I looked out at 26,000 feet. The world was spread out below me. I was literally on top of the world. There's no feeling like it. If you've ever been there, or if you ever have a chance to go there, you know what I mean. Ladies and gentlemen, Toastmasters, our TV viewing audience, my dream as a small town boy in southern Minnesota was to become a Navy pilot. I wore Coke bottle glasses with 2200 vision. That wasn't going to happen. But through an opportunity through the Navy ROTC program at the University of Minnesota, I spent my my winter break at Kingsville Naval Air Station down in Texas. I got to fly for a few minutes anyway in a TA-4 jet before the commander took it over and showed me some maneuvers that I'll never experience again. I got to fly a T-44, which is the prop version of the training program. I got to fly, something I haven't done except as a passenger, of course, since that time. Flying into the sun, flying straight up, gave me a story that I've been able to carry with me all this time. But until I actually chose to share it with someone, that story was just something I knew inside. Perhaps you have a story. Perhaps you have spent time in the Boundary Waters canoe area with a canoe on your shoulders, walking off between two lakes, trekking off and putting the canoe down, going out in the middle of the lake to wait for sunset and for the northern lights, the aurora borealis, to come soaring over you in a private fireworks show that is just remarkable. Or perhaps you spent last winter with your grandma as she crocheted and did her knitting and her different crafts and told you the stories about how she actually did have to walk uphill both ways to her school while going barefoot and carrying her siblings on her back. Each of us has our stories. Each of our stories is personal. It's important. You have your stories, whether you care to tell them or not. But the best thing about your stories, my stories, your stories belong to you. The most important thing we talk about in Toastmasters for the icebreaker speech is you're telling your story. Your story belongs to you. You can't get it wrong. You don't really need notes, except maybe a few guidelines to tell you what to talk about. And no one can correct you because it's your story. With the Tall Tales contest coming up in a few weeks, we'll hear a lot of people stretching the truth. But again, it's their story. Who's to say they're wrong? The important thing about stories is that stories are what make us not just hollow shells, not just words on paper. Stories are what make us live. Stories make our spirits live. I'd like to share with you a story that means an awful lot to me. I call it Quiet Night. My feet started to tingle as I adjusted the way I sat in the Black Hawk helicopter. I once again checked my magazine. Everything was secure on my M16 as we flew out of the city of Baghdad right before dawn. We were flying from the central part of the city where we were based to another base a few miles away. We had to travel in darkness because otherwise we'd be a clear target. Did we ever take fire? We're not really sure. We did see some muzzle flashes on the ground, but we figured we were probably out of range. I thought back about a few months earlier. I had never even dreamed I would be in this position. I was at home. My wife was getting pregnant, and I was about to leave on a journey that would change my life forever. But now I find myself here in the helicopter, and in 24 days, I'll be going home. I'll be going home to my 5-month-old daughter. I'll be going home to my wife, who I haven't seen since our daughter was born. I'll be going home, and it makes me think, take a moment and say a prayer for those around me, for the safety of those around me, for each of us to get home safely, and for me to get home to my family and see them again. That's a story of mine. It's sometime that means a lot to me. Telling this story for the first time a few years ago reminded me that every one of us has these stories. Whether it's a story about being with our parents, being with a friend or a loved one, or just being out and enjoying and appreciating nature. Each of us has our stories, but the only way other people know them is for us to tell them. I'd like to share another story. It's sort of a carryover from the previous one. It's called Homecoming. Flying in to Fort Bliss, Texas. Who would ever be glad to be flying into Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso? I was. Who would have thought it would be so emotional to step off of a plane and to have a 20-piece Army band playing the Star-Spangled Banner as I stepped down the gangway onto the ground, dropped to my knees, and yes, it's corny, but I kissed the ground. I'd been out of the country for a long time, but we finally made it through our adventures and we made it home. 29 reservists coming home after being gone for 18 months on our tour to places, some we can talk about, some we can't. We didn't know each other before when we started this journey. We were reservists plucked from our individual units throughout the country. Now we're going home. We say farewell at the McDonald's at the airport. We have one last meal together at breakfast. Then we go our separate ways to our individual gates. We take the time to give a few hugs, give some time to say some farewells. We say that we're going to keep in touch with each other. We even try to mean it at the time. But the one thing on all our minds is going home. It's a few hours away now. We're not traveling in uniform. You see other people traveling in uniform. We didn't travel in uniform because we were all individuals. When you're traveling in a group, it's safer to travel in uniform, but when you're an individual, it just doesn't feel right. I made the trip home. I arrived at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Everything was sort of a blur on the moving sidewalks on the way through the different concourses. I don't know which concourse I landed on. All I knew is I found myself at the top of the escalator going down into the baggage claim area. And I ran down. You're not supposed to run on escalators. I don't recommend it for anyone. But I ran down that escalator because at the bottom was my wife and my 5-month-old daughter. I was blessed to have been able to come home for 2 weeks to see her born. And when she was 1 week old, I handed her back to my wife, and I got on a plane back to Iraq. Nothing compares with that feeling I had when I got to pick her up and hold her and hold my wife and held them together. And our daughter looked at me so confused because she heard my voice on the telephone. She knew who I was, and she was wondering why I was crying. Stories. That's one of my stories. You have stories too. Maybe you kissed the Blarney Stone. Maybe you traveled to a mountainous peak in the Tibet to try to find enlightenment. Maybe you traveled through the Middle East with a backpack on your back. Maybe you worked with the Peace Corps. Maybe you worked at a food shelf in your hometown. Whatever your story is, it meant something to you. Your life has meaning. You have stories to tell. Gene Roddenberry inspired many people through his sharing of his dream. I've shared with you some of my stories that made an impact on me. Hopefully I've inspired you to think about your stories and how important they really are. These stories make us who we are. I challenge each one of you. Think of your stories. Write them down. Share them with your friends, with your family, with Toastmasters Live. Share your stories so that people will know who you are and where you've been. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you so much, Kent, for that amazing speech. I think we all have stories to tell, just as you highlighted, Kent, and it's really an essence of human nature to share and hear those stories that make us human. As you hinted at in your speech, Kent, spring is also an exciting time for Toastmasters because it means this spring speech contest season. This season is the Tall Tales and International Speech Contest. So we will for sure hear some highly entertaining stories as part of the Tall Tales contest. You see, the contest season gives Toastmasters members the opportunity to compete, starting at the club level and progressing as far as the international stage. They have the opportunity to refine and retune every step along the way. And both members and non-members have the opportunity to attend these contests and observe some of the most polished speakers at the local, state, and international level. If you're interested in learning more about speech contests, go online to www.toastmasters.org or check our district-specific site at www.d6tm.org. And there's plenty of information for you to figure out or find the closest speech contest and hear some incredible stories. The next part of our evening, we are going to shift gears into an impromptu speaking session called Table Topics. During this session, our Table Topics master will come to the lectern and ask 3 questions answered by 3 individuals, one at a time. This gives the respondents an opportunity to practice their abilities to speak on the fly. So next, we'll take a brief second to set up our next session and move into Table Topics. Please welcome to the lectern our Table Topics mistress of the evening, Sherry Jacobson.
Thank you. Good evening. This is the Table Topics session of our meeting. This gives our members an opportunity to speak off the cuff. And if you've ever had a job interview, then you know what it's like to speak off the cuff. I have 3 questions prepared, one for each of our respondents, and I will go ahead and start. Who is number 1? Okay. I've never really celebrated a spring break. As a kid, I just enjoyed the days off from school. As an adult, spring break means to avoid any activities or travel. Do you have any special memories of a spring break?
Thank you, Table Topics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and our viewing audience. I actually have never celebrated spring break as well. I do remember having school off. We really enjoyed that as kids. But I played sports, so typically there was some sort of a sport event or school activity that kept us busy most of spring break. Naturally, they were very smart in that manner. I also tended to work a lot. Once I was 16, I had my own car. I could work as much as I wanted. We were starting to get the golf course ready during spring break and making sure all the equipment worked and we were ready to go. Everyone knew their roles. So not only did I get my winter job, but I got to get started on my summer job, and they always gave us donuts, so I was there right away in the morning. As I grew up as an adult, I kept working. I kept spring cleaning because now I have a house and this adulting stuff that I have to deal with. So I skipped spring break. I don't know what I'm going to do when I have kids, but haven't experienced it yet. Thank you.
Thank you. My favorite season is fall. Crisp days after the long, hot days of summer. I also love to see the leaves turn. And Halloween is my favorite holiday, and orange is my favorite color. What is your favorite season and why?
Thank you, Madam Table Topics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and viewing audience. My favorite season is actually spring. I love it when it gets bright and sunny, and I can be outside walking my dog or doing a lot of other things, playing tennis or just going out for a bike ride. I love it when the crocuses pop through the ground, and I usually do go on a spring break. This year, I'm planning to go to Australia and New Zealand, so I'm really looking forward to that. Last year, we were in Spain, and I tell you, that was fabulous as well. So even though when I was in college, I went to Daytona Beach and had a wild time, I've kind of toned it down now, and I'm going to other places to have another adventure. But I also like the feeling of opening up the doors, getting fresh air in, doing spring cleaning, and getting rid of a bunch of stuff. So I have a lot of things that I like about spring.
Wow, great answer. I envy you on your travels. My last question. My favorite thing about spring is watching the baby ducklings and the baby geese on the golf course. What is your favorite thing about spring?
Thank you, Madam Table Topics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and the viewing audience. What is my favorite thing about spring? Well, I love that it is coming up to golf season, and so the ducks and the geese on the course don't really do anything for me, but I do love that I'm going to be able to get out and play some golf and hit the ball around and just be outside. I really love being outside, so having spring come around means I get to go hiking again. I try and not go hiking in the winter too much because it's freezing outside, but I do it occasionally out during the winter, but I really enjoy hiking. And then, of course, my most favorite thing about spring means that summer is around the corner, and that means I can go motorcycle riding. So that is my absolute favorite part about spring, is that motorcycle riding is not too far away. Madam Table Topics Master.
Thank you. That is all the questions I have today. I will ask the Toastmaster to come back up, and we will resume our regular meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Table Topics Master, for those great questions. And I think we are all starting to feel a little bit of spring fever as the days are getting longer and the weather is starting to get brighter and warmer. We had a really great meeting for the evening, and we heard from some different Table Topics respondents. Up next, we'll hear from our evaluation team, and specifically Jamie, who will be evaluating Kent's speech. Please help me welcome to the lectern, Jamie.
Thank you, Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, our viewing audience, and Kent. This was a wonderful speech. Ken came in, he had his manual ready, and he said, "I'm going to inspire you today." We laughed a little bit because we're us, but you inspired us. This was a lot of fun. For me, I tell stories, but I don't really get into the details. I rush through it, and then I get back to work. But for Kent, he goes through and he talks about being on top of the world and soaring. I honestly thought he was going to inspire us to fly, and I was like, fat chance. Luckily, he changed the topic a little bit. Thank you. But those details make all of the difference when you're inspiring someone, and Kent really gave us a really good example of this. Not only that, but he tied it back to make it relevant for people like me who don't fly. You really made it relevant, and you made me want to tell more stories. I did compete in tall tales, and it was a lot of fun. It was fun exaggerating, saying details, and telling one of my favorite stories of my first fishing experience. I think everyone should try it out at contests. Kent really showed us how to do it. He gave a great example, and he showed us what it's like to tell his story. I do have one thing to potentially improve upon. I felt like there were a couple awkward pauses when you were transitioning between the stories of flying and bringing it back to us. And I think it's just a matter of practice, especially with distractions. I do it in the car. Some people do it with their kids screaming and their dogs barking. Some people do it with the TV on. But anytime when you can have distractions, that's going to help you get used to some of the transitions that aren't as natural, because you're a natural storyteller. Anyone can tell your story without notes, but once you get outside of your story, you need something to help you remember the things that aren't natural and personal to you, and I think that could really help. Overall, I loved it. I really hope everyone was inspired to share their stories, because how else are we going to get to know you and get to know your stories and experiences if you don't share it with us? Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Up next, I'll invite Ben Smith, who will give his timer report for the evening. Please help me welcome Ben Smith.
Thank you, Tyler. Tonight we had for our first speech, we had Kent Hawks give us an 8 to 10 minute speech on inspiration, and Kent went for 11 minutes and 20 seconds, so a little bit over, but it was a great speech, so we enjoyed it. For table topics, we had Jamie first, and Jamie went for 1 minute and 10 seconds. Judy was second, and Judy went for about 1 minute 30, and then I brought up the end of table topics, and I spoke for 55 seconds. And our timing for table topics is 1 to 2 minutes. For our speech evaluation, the timing should be between 2 and 3 minutes, and Jamie made it right at 2 minutes. So good job, Jamie. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our Toastmaster. Tyler?
Thanks, Ben. I'll take this opportunity to conclude with an overall evaluation of the meeting. I think we had a lot of fun tonight. We got to hear some exciting stories. We also learned about what we enjoy about spring and the different seasons. And we got to hear about some of the exciting parts of spring as it relates to Toastmasters, specifically being the beginning of contest season. I know we're all really excited to see some great contests. So again, if you're interested in attending a contest, please go online and look at where the nearest contest you can be found. Our area contest will be held March 30th in Roseville, and I have a couple flyers for you, the audience, to take home with you if you want to attend or if you can volunteer to help out. My only comment, I think that as a Toastmaster, this is the first time I've been a Toastmaster at Toastmasters Live. I can work a little bit more on the flow and organization of the overall meeting just to make it a little more natural and proceed easier throughout the agenda. I think, though, overall we did a great show, especially with a limited number of members in attendance tonight. The tech team held strong and did a great job at the cameras, lighting, and the sound, with Judy holding out the soundboard. And just want to extend one last invitation for you to come join us here at the studio. We meet every second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at the North Metro TV station in Blaine, Minnesota. You're always welcome as a guest to come check out what we're all about and to hear some amazing stories. Thank you from Toastmasters Live.